Hello everyone. I'm really happy to have you back on my channel. Today's story is not about anything too grand, not about dazzling success, nor about moments that immediately make people amazed at first glance. Instead, it's a very real journey, very grounded, very relatable, of two Tien and Jack, during the days when life no longer felt as smooth as before, no longer followed familiar rhythms, and no longer carried that sense of security they once had. These were the days when every step required more thought, every decision carried pressure, and every choice was no longer simple. In a small corner of the countryside, there was no noise, no hustle, no sounds of the busy city. Only the wind, only the sunlight, only quiet, open spaces. Jack stood in the middle of a pomelo garden. A garden not too large, but enough to make one feel as if standing in a completely different world. Rows of green trees, planted in straight lines, their leaves spreading wide, intertwining, creating gentle patches of shade. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, falling onto the ground in broken streaks of light. At first glance, everything seemed peaceful, a kind of peace that, if only seen with the eyes, could make people think. Life here was simple and easy, but behind it, not everyone could see, was a pressure hard to put into words. It wasn't pressure from something specific, not a problem that could be clearly named, but a feeling that everything was changing, and he himself had to adapt. Jack was no longer the person working in the city, no longer the days when the work was familiar, the schedule was clear, and everything followed a stable path. No longer the mornings that began with routine tasks, no longer the evenings that ended with the feeling that everything was under control. Now, he stood in a completely different place, a different environment, a different way of living, a different rhythm, and more importantly, a completely new beginning. He started learning again from scratch. Not big things, not complicated knowledge, but very basic things that he had never experienced before. Learning how to take care of trees, not just watering them, not just watching them grow, but understanding what the trees needed at each moment. Learning how to prune branches, not simply cutting them off, but knowing where to cut, what to keep, so the tree could grow better. Learning to look at a canopy and realize whether it was healthy or weak. Learning to observe without being told. Learning to understand without needing to ask too much. He listened to every piece of advice, not just to hear, not just to let it pass, but to truly understand. From a friend who had walked this path before, someone who once started just like him, once felt lost, once didn't know what to do, and had also gone through difficult days. From choosing the right plants, not randomly, but suited to the soil, the weather, the real conditions, to manual pollination, a task that required precision, patience, and careful attention. No rushing. No carelessness. To the act of waiting. Not for a day. Not for a week. But watching time pass. Looking at the trees. Without seeing clear changes. Yet still believing that inside things were happening. And then he realized farming was not simple at all. Not an easy job as many people think. Not something where having land automatically brings results. But instead, a process that requires persistence, continuous learning, and acceptance. Acceptance that success doesn't always come. Acceptance that there are days when things don't go as expected. Acceptance that he would have to start over more than once. But it was also through that process that he began to see things differently. No more rushing. No more impatience. No more searching for instant results. But learning to slow down, look closer, and understand more deeply what he was doing. And then, in a very ordinary moment, nothing special, no major change, he realized something. If done right, if patient enough, if he didn't give up halfway, then farming was not just a job, not just a way to make a living, but a path real enough, strong enough for him to, step by step, find his footing again. At a time when life was still unsteady. In another place, Tien, there were no complaints, no hesitation, no signs that would draw attention from others. She remained quiet, just as she had always faced life. Not noisy, not rushed, but never careless either. She stepped out into the garden when the sunlight was not yet too harsh, when the air still held a gentle touch of the early morning. The loofah trellises, the pumpkin beds, appeared before her eyes. Not things of great value, not products that would make people amazed, but the most genuine things. She bent down, gently reaching out her hands, harvesting each loofah. Not hurried, not careless. Every time she picked one, it was done with care, as if she understood that each small thing carried a piece of effort, a piece of hope. Each pumpkin placed into the basket. Not many, but enough. Enough for her to bring to the market. Enough to begin a new day. A day that she already knew would not be easy, but still had to be lived through. She brought what she had to the market. Not a big market, not the busiest place, but enough to clearly feel the rhythm of life. She sat down under the sun that gradually became harsher. There was no solid shelter, no real way to avoid the heat. Only a small corner, a simple seat, and the things she brought with her. Voices calling out to customers began to echo around. Not just hers, but of many others. People who were also trying, just like her. Tien spoke up. "Ma'am, would you like to buy some loofah?" Her voice wasn't loud, not particularly noticeable, but steady, repeating again and again, not out of habit, Not because it was memorized, but because she understood. If she didn't speak, no one would know. If she didn't call out, no one would stop. And if she wasn't persistent, then everything she brought would be taken back home. Words that seemed simple, but carried within them an entire effort. Not an effort to be better than others, but an effort not to be left behind. There were moments when someone stopped, looked, asked for the price, then left without buying. She didn't insist, didn't hold them back, just stayed silent, then continued. There were times she had to bargain, little by little, not to win or lose, but because every small at the dinner table didn't let it become a burden in anyone else's thoughts. But then, the truth couldn't be hidden forever. Not in a sudden reveal, not in a tense moment, but in a very gentle way. A way that, when people realized everything was already clear, clear enough that no explanation was needed, and also enough to make the space fall silent. Jack's mother didn't blame anyone. Not a single harsh word. Not a single question that would make others uncomfortable. Only sadness. A kind of sadness that wasn't too obvious, but showed in her eyes, in every silent glance, in the long pauses. Sad because she felt that she herself had unintentionally put her son in such a situation. Sad because what had happened couldn't be undone, couldn't be changed. Sad because, at the moment her son needed support the most, she couldn't do anything significant. Couldn't help in the way a mother always hopes to, other than tears falling quietly, unspoken, and the guilt silent, yet persistent. Not something that comes and goes, but something that stays, repeating in her thoughts every time she looks at him, every time she thinks about what he is facing. But in the middle of all that, amid the pressure, the unspoken emotions, the long silences, Tien was still the one there. Not in a noticeable way, not doing anything that draws attention, but she was the one who didn't leave. She didn't say big words, didn't make promises beyond her ability, didn't create the illusion that everything would change immediately. She simply stayed beside them, in a very ordinary way, yet in a very steady way. She listened, not to respond right away, not to offer solutions, but to understand. To understand what Jack didn't say, to understand what his mother was holding inside, to understand even the things no one put into words. And then, she chose to believe. Not a blind belief. Not believing that everything would be easy, but believing that, no matter how difficult it was, they could keep going, as long as they didn't give up. She didn't promise to change everything, didn't say that she would achieve something great, didn't set distant goals, but she chose to stay when everything was no longer stable, to stay when what lay ahead was still unclear, to stay when each passing day carried worries, To stay. Not because she had no choice, but because it was her choice. To stay. At the hardest times. To stay. When there were no answers yet. To stay. When the person beside her didn't need someone better. Didn't need someone more perfect. But only needed someone who wouldn't leave. And from those very simple things, a new direction began to open. Not a sudden decision. Not a major turning point. But a shift. Slow. Yet clear. They looked again at what they had. No longer dwelling too much on what was lost. No longer being pulled by things that couldn't be changed. But began to focus on what was in front of them. Farming was not the first choice, but it was the right choice. At that time, developing the garden, from what Jack was learning, from experience still very new, but enough to begin. Raising chickens, not on a large scale, not with heavy investment, but step by step, piece by piece. Small plans were formed, not complicated, not ambitious, but practical enough to be carried out. Those plans didn't create immediate change, didn't bring quick results, but they carried something very important. That was hope. A hope not too big, but enough to keep them from stopping. Night fell. The space became quieter. No more sounds of the daytime. No more rush. The meal remained simple. Still familiar dishes. Nothing changed too much. But the feeling was no longer the same. No more heaviness. No more long silences. No more feeling that everyone was holding their own thoughts. Because they began to understand. Difficulty is not the most frightening thing. Not what makes people collapse. What exhausts people the most is not the situation, but the feeling of facing everything alone. And when no longer alone, when someone is there, even without many words, even without changing everything, everything becomes a little easier. And perhaps what makes this story meaningful is not whether they become rich or not. Not whether they achieve something great. Not the outcome at a specific moment. But in the hardest days, in the moments when everything was uncertain, they still chose not to let go of each other. Still chose to walk together, even if slowly, but without stopping. If you've watched until here, perhaps you also understand. Life is not always smooth, not always going the way we expect. There will be times when everything changes unexpectedly, without preparation. But as long as there is someone beside you, they don't need to be perfect. They don't need to do something great. They just need not to leave. Then every difficulty can begin again. And the story of Tien and Jack perhaps doesn't end here. Because the journey they are on is not a short one. Not a path where results can be seen immediately. Will the path they chose truly help them overcome everything? Will what they are doing be enough to change their lives? Or will there be more challenges waiting ahead? Let's continue watching in the next episodes.
Xin chào mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video về câu chuyện của Tử Tiên và Jack nha mọi người. Ở trong tập hôm nay thì Tử Tiên và Jack đang cố gắng để có thể vượt qua khó khăn kinh tế đợt này, và hơn nữa là mẹ Lợi thì đợt này thì đã biết được cái sự khó khăn của Jack, và bà cảm thấy vô cùng có lỗi vì cái việc mà công ty trở nên khó khăn như thế này. Cũng một phần là do lỗi của mẹ Lợi đầu tư cùng với cô Thu, dẫn tới nguồn vốn của công ty bị hao hụt đó mọi người. Jack phải bù cho cái khoản đấy, nên là sau khi mà biết Jack đã phải bán ô tô đi để vượt qua khó khăn hiện tại thì bà cảm thấy vô cùng hối hận. Vậy thì liệu mọi chuyện sẽ ra sao, diễn biến tiếp theo sẽ như thế nào thì mình mời mọi người đăng ký kênh của mình, sau đó theo dõi những tập tiếp theo và đừng bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào mọi người nhé. Cảm ơn mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau. Bye bye.